Maybe I should start by introducing our speaker, Dr. Łukasz Muniowski.
Hello. Thank you.
Yes, and I think, looking at your bio, it seems that I think you're the busiest academic in Poland right now, because not only have you published a few books very recently, you're now working on 2 book projects and essay collections. So there is quite a lot of things going on. So Łukasz has a Ph.D. in American literature from University of Warsaw. He is an assistant professor at Wszechnica, Polska, Szkoła, Wyższa w Warszawie, and a lecturer at Społeczna Akademia Nauk, and an English teacher at the Zuzanna Ginczanka High School. He's the author of Three Pointer, a 40-year NBA history that was published in 2020, narrating the NBA representations of leading players after the Michael Jordan era, published in 2021, so very recent. And The Sixth Man, a history of the NBA off the bench, also published this year.
It's getting published. Sorry. It's getting published this year, but
so soon. We'll get the presses soon. Together with Aldona Kobus, he co-edited "Sex, Death, and Resurrection in Altered Carbon: Essays on the Netflix series," also published last year. And in the near future, he will edit three collections of essays on the Uncharted video game series, on boredom, and on the works of Truman Capote. So as you can see, the busiest man in Warsaw now. He's also working on 2 book projects, one on James Harden and the Houston Rockets, and another on the 35-year history of the New Jersey Nets basketball team and its relationship with the state of New Jersey. And today I'm very excited to hear his talk entitled Narratives, Basketball Authorship, NBA Storytelling on and Off the Court. And I'm very excited not only for today's presentation, but also for the Q&A session. And I hope that the American Studies Center's students will reveal themselves to be, basketball aficionados, as is supposedly, who we are as an institution, and basketball as the game. Okay, Łukasz, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marta, for this kind introduction. And thank you for having me. Thanks to all of you for coming. So I'm ready to start, hopefully. So I started unknowingly collecting materials for my academic work when I was about 9 years old. And it was about the time that I bought my first NBA trading cards in a regular kiosk in the middle of my hometown, inhabited by around 30,000 people. And so Poisk was not exactly a town where such things were easy to come by, which made getting hold of them by a kid such as myself all the more unlikely. And while I was enjoying NBA basketball earlier, watching games and regularly buying the 2 sole Polish magazines devoted to NBA basketball, the 1996-97 Fleer basketball trading cards have turned me into a fan. I have spent a small fortune on them, which made what happened later, so the cards getting sliced by rats and mice living in the basement, all the more heartbreaking. And the cards, as you can see, were not particularly special, just a picture of a player with some basic statistics like games played, points, rebounds, assists, steals, and blocks. But they had certain magnetism about them that I found hard to explain, because the statistics were not mere numbers. They carried a certain narrative quality within them, and buried within those numbers were stories of triumph and failure that I became so eager to unearth. And for example, there was this guy called Michael Jordan, here on the right, who everyone considered to be the best player ever. But what made him the best? Did he score the most points during his career? Well, as you can see, no, he is actually 5th on the all-time list. So, okay then, maybe something easier. Was he selected the best player of the season? the most times? Also, no. That would be Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who was selected MVP as the best player of the season is called 6 times. Jordan was selected 5 times. So maybe he won the most championships then. No, Bill Russell won, as you can see, 11, as opposed to Jordan's 6. So why was he the best? It did not make much sense then. The fact that he garnered such universal love made me embrace his opponents, because what was fun in rooting for someone who supposedly always won, right? What's the point? Back then, I did not know how special for the development of the NBA Jordan actually was. How thanks to his extraordinary play, he made the league go global, and how he became the first celebrity who became a brand. So after 20 years of what I will proudly call research, but what was actually just your regular average basketball fandom, I realized that Jordan actually crafted the ultimate sports narrative. And I made him the point of departure of my Ph.D. thesis, which recently came out in book form. So there's the cover, very proud of it. So my second book, this one right here, is devoted to career narratives of selected prominent NBA players after the Michael Jordan era, understood as the time after his second retirement in January of 1999. It was a pivotal time for the league, as Jordan became synonymous with NBA basketball and the face of its international expansion. And basketball fans acquainted with the NBA through Jordan's heroics during the 1992 Olympics on the Dream Team or his dominant play for the Chicago Bulls did not know any other reality apart from that in which Jordan's team emerged victorious. And obviously he was the best player in the league at the time that the people started following it. And continuing to market NBA basketball without him was a significant challenge faced by the league, the teams, the sponsors, but more so the players themselves. It was necessary for the next generation of players coming of age just as Jordan retired to craft captivating narratives on the court. Some were expected to be the next Jordan. Others were just tasked with filling his shoes on certain marketing platforms. And due to the fact that Jordan was many things to many people, the responsibility was dispersed on various individuals. So in my book, 8 players, their private and public personas, as well as their depictions by the media, are analyzed not only on the basis of the success that they have enjoyed on the basketball court, but more so in the light of what they came to represent for the modern NBA. And those players have been selected because of the significance of their career narratives, as all of them correspond with certain archetypes prevalent in the world not only of professional basketball, but of professional sports in general. And while these do not exhaust the possibilities of storytelling in sports, they are among the most unique and captivating. In a sense, this book is an invitation to discuss career narratives crafted by other players, their agents and/or the media. They can be mostly found in biographies and autobiographies of leading sports stars, although, as I prove in my book, they are not necessary to form a comprehensive story. So, as you probably know, biographies and autobiographies are fact-based stories about singular, exceptional individuals. And in the world of basketball, no one was as exceptional as Michael Jordan. His cultural significance was beyond comparison, as he not only influenced the way basketball is played, so with flair and individualism, but also how the players dress and conduct themselves on and off the court. And his career records include 10 NBA scoring titles, including 7 consecutive scoring titles, a regular season scoring average of 41 points per game, and 866 consecutive games with at least 10 points scored. And while it may be argued that he was not the best basketball player in history, Jordan was without a doubt the most influential one. He was the first celebrity to establish his own sneaker brand, Air Jordan, which was endorsed by Derek Jeter, Carmelo Anthony, Russell Westbrook, Eminem, Kevin Hart, or Spike Lee. And in 2016, he was awarded the Presidential Medal of Honor for his contributions to American culture. 11 years after retirement, he was still the most popular athlete in the United States. In fact, Jordan may have been the most important athlete of the 20th century. He starred in numerous commercials and movies, but was also responsible for the creation of the present-day sneaker culture. More importantly, he was the first celebrity who truly became a brand, which facilitated the commodification of the modern sports star and professional sports in general. And the formation of the brand myth was possible because Jordan reached a truly mythical status, something that the players analyzing this work strove to achieve, but eventually failed to. And this myth, of course, similarly to those of Muhammad Ali or Diego Maradona, is not to be confused with brand myths, permeating current culture deeply rooted in capitalism. And myth, as Joseph Campbell puts it, is important for man. It becomes a form of escape from bland reality, a symbol of man's calling, an expression of hope. Even if the sole purpose of the brand myth is basically to sell merchandise. So while the brand myth does not supply the symbols that carry the human spirit forward, as Campbell puts it, it still gives meaning to human life, as it provides it with a sort of ritual action, practiced through watching the mythical hero perform and buying the merchandise he promotes. Jordan was the only athlete who reached mythical status in the anthropological as well as in the brand sense. And the influence of athletes is clearly not limited to on-court actions, nor are their in-game heroics the sole reason for their popularity. The games themselves would not gain much exposure if it were not for their placement in larger narrative framework. This has as much to do with presenting the athletes as notable heroes in the everyday mythology as with establishing and upholding their brand myths. The role of narrative in creating both was well recognized by Jordan and Nike. And the way Nike and Jordan mastered the sneaker business was through their storytelling. So many of his shoes are iconic because they have significant moments or games they are tied to, like the picture Jordan once, which Jordan was wearing during one of the most important games of his career, a playoff game in Boston, setting the scoring record in the local arena. Jordan was a pioneer of modern-day branding, and other athletes, as well as other celebrities, followed the same narrative path, turning their life stories into commodities. Competitive on and flawless off the court, Jordan carefully modeled his personal life so that it would match his marketing persona. And he was presented as a singular genius, even though basketball is a team sport. This was made possible partially through his incredible performances and partially through the NBA's reliance on the coverage of stars instead of teams. And thanks to worldwide television transmissions, fandom became less local and more global, which made fans root for individual players instead of teams. To put it simply, fans now had no loyalty to a team from a city in which they did not live. People were watching games to see Jordan beat whoever was standing in his way, whether it was the Pistons, the Knicks, the Jazz, you name it. Jordan was the first athlete who understood how narratives function in the public sphere, and for the first time, the sporting, marketing, and personal narratives all met at one point, the career narrative of an athlete. Ever since Jordan's rise to fame, the three became inseparable, which is best exemplified not so much by Jordan's career narrative, as he was the one who originated that particular hybrid, but by the career narratives of players that came after him. So Jordan's personal and professional story established a blueprint, whereas the career narratives of the next generation of basketball stars show how potent this new model of storytelling in sports has been. And one of the examples of Jordan's immense influence on athletes' career narratives concerns his first retirement in 1993. After his father was murdered, the off-court event became a part of Jordan's career story. For a brief period, Jordan was a professional baseball player, because it was something his father always wanted, at least presumably. The superstar successfully incorporated a traumatic personal event into his public profile. It became an element of his mythical persona. Even when it came to his final retirement, Jordan used narrative tools to provide a perfect closure. In his name, Nike bought out a full page in the Sunday newspapers in order to publish his farewell letter, which began with the words, "Dear Basketball." It was seen as a gesture of appreciation not only to basketball fans, but all Americans, as Jordan was referring to them directly, even though the letter itself was addressed to the game that made him famous. And the letter itself paved the way for LeBron James to turn his 2010 free agency decision to join the Miami Heat into a TV special, or Kobe Bryant and Dwayne Wade to make their final seasons feel more like farewell tours than competitive seasons of great players. Every trade, injury, or retirement can now be turned into a media event. And analyzing career narratives makes clear how stories permeate the everyday, since they influence even something seemingly as unliterary as sports. Because of Jordan's importance to the present shape not only of the NBA, but of professional sports in general, he provides a valid point of departure for such a discussion. The spotlight that was directed at Jordan, thanks to his extraordinary achievements, was eventually extended onto the whole league, as the media was looking for an heir to his throne, even while Jordan was still in the NBA. The players described in my work saw firsthand how the league had changed, and their careers transformed with it as well, as all of them became professional athletes when Michael Jordan was the biggest star in the world, and all of them benefited from the way he popularized the league. Financially, they undoubtedly owe him, but when it comes to myth-making and narrative, none of them came close to dethroning his heirs. In my study, I discussed the selection of leading NBA players whose career narratives are a direct consequence of Jordan's popularity. So Shaquille O'Neal, Alonzo Mourning, Vin Baker, Allen Iverson, Antoine Walker, Steve Nash, Tim Duncan, and Kobe Bryant. None of them were as successful as Jordan, but it was Jordan's appearance or ascension that allowed them to gain fame and or notoriety. Collectively, these 8 players embody the distinguishing character profiles and career arcs of sports superstars, with dominance, individualism, and athleticism being as much parts of sports star culture as egotism, injuries, boredom, addiction, and or bankruptcy. There were, of course, other players whose stories could have been analyzed in this work, to mention the 7'6" Mormon Sean Bradley, who is best known for being dunked on by multiple players smaller than him, and who also has recently passed away. Rasheed Wallace, one of the biggest trash talkers in the history of the NBA, and its all-time leader in technical fouls. Or Jason Williams, a white player who was nicknamed White Chocolate due to his impressive ball handling ability. The reason why these players are not discussed here is that either their career narratives are not sufficiently covered or overlap thematically with life stories of the players whose autobiographical, if I may call them that, portrayals are the subject of this work. And I have placed them in my book in the order they joined the NBA. And if they were selected in the same draft, the arrangement depends on the number with which they were picked. The exception is Kobe Bryant, who was so focused on being the next Michael Jordan throughout his career that it is only fitting that this work should end with him and not Tim Duncan, who was selected a year later in the 1998 NBA draft. So Shaquille O'Neal, that's the first one that I covered, joined the NBA as the first pick in the 1992 draft. He was exceptionally mobile and athletic for a player of his stature. So O'Neal was 7 feet, I think 1 inch tall, and he weighed around 300 pounds. That is why he was marketed as inhuman, both on and off the basketball court. and he presented himself similarly in his autobiographical works. When not playing basketball, O'Neal starred in movies, recorded rap records, and served as a reserve police officer, among other things. And he also did a Ph.D. in education, I think. So, yeah, busy. The fact that he was able to pursue all these other interests positions him as Superman, and his portrayal that enhanced such a persona is analyzed. O'Neal was criticized for not focusing enough on basketball, but in a true superhero fashion, he proved others wrong by winning MVP trophies, championships, and still being able to do what he wanted. The next player I cover is Alonzo Mourning, who was drafted just one pick below O'Neal. Unlike the fun-loving, goofy Shaq, Mourning was always tense and focused. His career was affected by focal glomerulosclerosis. Sorry. So it's a fatal disease. Anyway, a fatal disease that attacks kidneys, which Mourning managed to beat. He did not only survive, but was able to return to professional basketball and win his first NBA championship. And Mourning's story is unique because of that, and he uses its uniqueness to construct a triumphant narrative of a Christian who beat the odds and realized his personal and professional goals. His autobiography, Resilience, published in 2009, reads as an almost spiritual text full of religious advice. It is also a story about the body. All athletes make a living with their bodies, but the body features Mourning's narrative to a degree rarely seen in sports biographies and autobiographies as well. The next player is Vin Baker. So Vin Baker joined the NBA a year later with the 8th pick. The expectations for him were not as high as those regarding O'Neal or Mourning, but Baker managed to play in 4 All-Star games and was selected 2 times to all NBA teams. Because of anxiety associated with playing basketball, so something rarely connected with professional basketball players, at least during the 90s, Baker started drinking alcohol before, then during games, and eventually became addicted. His autobiography, God in Starbucks, tells the story of his alcoholism, downfall, and eventual return to basketball, this time as a coach. The narrative form framing the account of addiction and recovery is not unlike that you might encounter in AA's master narrative, adhering to its 12-step program. Next one is Allen Iverson. So the first pick in the 1996 NBA draft, Allen Iverson was one of the most controversial players in league history. Coming from a complicated background, Iverson was the NBA's utmost tough guy, despite being just 6 feet tall. He drove to the basket and scored on players twice his size, constantly sacrificing his body during games. Simultaneously, he refused to practice, clashed with teammates and coaches, drank, and wasted away so much money that he almost became bankrupt. And the books and movies devoted to Iverson mostly center around 2 events, which happened in a year's time. One is an impressive simple shot he made during the 2001 NBA Finals, as well as his immediate reaction to the basket, which you can see on the picture, and a press conference a year later, in which he questioned the importance of practicing with his teammates. And during this conference, I think he mentioned the word practice 21 or 26 times, don't really remember, but you should definitely look up the press conference on YouTube. It's really entertaining. Antoine Walker was selected with the 6th pick in the same draft as Iverson, Bryant, and the next player that I'm going to discuss, so Steve Nash. Walker is the least accomplished player in the group selected for discussion, yet he was probably the most confident, at least on the court. His on-court confidence was most visible in his reliance on the three-point shot. Despite making just 1/3 of his career long-distance shots, Walker led the league in attempts for 3 straight seasons. The fact that he considered himself such a good shooter is contrasted with his off-court humility. Walker earned a lot of money, but he was also very generous, and his bankruptcy was a result of bad investments as much as of his willingness to give back to his community. His career narrative is analyzed with regard to his on-court confidence, as Walker believed that he was a better basketball player than he simply actually was. So the next player that I analyze is Steve Nash, currently the coach of the Brooklyn Nets, and the success enjoyed by Steve Nash is one of the biggest surprise stories in the history of professional basketball. When it seemed that a back injury would put an end to his career, Nash signed with the Phoenix Suns and won back-to-back MVP trophies when he was 31 and 32 years old. Part of the unlikeliness of his success is associated with who Nash was, a white Canadian point guard, hence a short, unathletic guy. On the example of his biography written by 2 Canadians, I present how problematic the assessment of Nash actually is. Some viewed him as a rebel, a regular guy, a team player who made everyone around him better. For others, he was the darling of the establishment, the league-approved revolutionary who simply benefited from the rule changes which gave smaller players more freedom on the court. The next player I discuss in my second book is Tim Duncan, who is arguably the most successful player, discussed as well. He won the most championships, so 5, and MVP trophies, 2 from this group, and for 19 straight seasons, his San Antonio Spurs made the playoffs. This implies a recurring pattern, which is clearly associated with boredom. For a player like Duncan, who was on one team throughout his career and played the same way since his first NBA season, there is really not enough drama to make his biography interesting. It would rather be a study of professionalism and nothing more. That is why, although he was the most successful player after the Jordan era and probably the best power forward in NBA history, there is no biography of Tim Duncan and probably never will be. The final chapter of my book is devoted to Kobe Bryant, the player who throughout his career, at times very successfully, tried to emulate Michael Jordan. He was an ultimate sports star, an individual in a team sport, who was able to turn every basketball game into a spectacle, understood both as an impressive performance and in the Debordian sense of making regular events more appealing for general consumption. The case in point is Bryant's final season, in which he was one of the worst players on a poor team, and his final performance, which was nothing more than a last game of the season between 2 teams that did not make the playoffs. Bryant, however, made it exceptional. This shows how important his life narrative was for Bryant, as well as for his fans. The league, the sponsors, and the player himself expected him to deliver a perfect ending to his career, and he did just that. Despite having a bad season, because Bryant averaged 17.6 points on 36% shooting, whereas his career averages were 25 points and 44% shooting. So despite that and being badly injured throughout most of the year, in his last career game, Bryant scored 60 points. However, I knew that my work in studying sports narratives was not done. So this time I wanted to focus on particular developments in the league through particular players and their career narratives. I was interested in 2 things, the 3-point shot and the role that the reserves play in sport. Hence my third book, which is coming out this year. So a regulated basketball game occurs when 2 teams consisting of 5 players each face each other on the court. It is good to have some reserves, but these are not always necessary for a game to take place. And in fact, in the early days of organized basketball, that was mostly the case, as an extra player meant extra costs for the organizers. Additional money needed to be put up for bringing to a game someone who would enter the court just in case, standing in for the injured starter. It was easy to distinguish between the starters and the reserves, as the former were clearly the supreme athletes. Even in the 1980s, 1990s, and early 2000s, starters played mostly huge minutes even during the regular season. Keeping the starters on the court simply guaranteed wins. Legendary players like Larry Bird or Isaiah Thomas, whose careers would have been prolonged due to load management, retired too early because of injuries acquired through playing large minutes. Load management is the luxury afforded to modern-day superstars, thanks to deeper, better benches. The 2019 NBA champions, the Toronto Raptors, are a prime example of what a solid bench can do for a superstar's career. One of the best modern-day basketball players, Kawhi Leonard, here pictured holding the trophy, who was then freshly traded from the San Antonio Spurs, was coming off a quad injury that limited his performance to just 9 games the season prior. To keep the player happy, Leonard was a free agent next season, which meant he could leave for free, and eventually did. So to keep Leonard happy and healthy for the postseason, the Raptors limited his playing time while putting bench players on the floor, and they called it proudly load management. In the regular season, 8 players appeared in at least 60 games, playing at least 20 minutes per game. This allowed Leonard to play 39 minutes per contest in the 24 games the team needed to play in order to win the championship title. In the finals, the Raptors used an 8-man rotation, with the 8th man, Norman Powell, playing 11 minutes per contest. The number of minutes for the 9th and 10th player of the finals rotation, so 2 minutes for Patrick McCaw and 0.17, so basically 17 seconds for Jeremy Lin, was the lowest by any NBA champion in the 2000s. And with the best players becoming much more powerful when it comes to them being able to join the teams of their liking and or teaming up with whoever they want, like was the case with LeBron James and Chris Bosh joining Dwayne Wade in Miami, or Anthony Davis and Paul George forcing their franchises to trade them to Los Angeles, it becomes understandable that teams focus more on bringing in 12 and not just 5 quality players. And there is no better proof of that development than the August 23, 2020 game between the Raptors and the Nets. In game 4 of the first round, the Raptors bench scored a league record 100 points and 150-122 win, clinching their team's progression to the next series. Coach Nick Nurse played all 12 of his players, 11 of them for at least 10 minutes. And each bench player scored at least 2 points, while 4 scored in double figures. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Sorry. In professional sports, the bench carries mostly negative connotations. Being on the bench means not playing, hence an action contrary to that of a professional player, whose obligation is clearly to play. Players often feel that they are wasting their time and talents when not playing at least 30 minutes per game. With visible frustration, they talk about being glued or chained to the bench. They are banished to the bench for not performing well enough. A benching may be considered a disciplinary action. When an athlete loses a starting spot, it may be either a sign of disrespect or a consequence of the disrespect shown to the rules of conduct set by authority figures, like coaches or team executives. So things like showing up on time and not missing practice are important for chemistry building because they help to convince role players that they are judged by the same criteria as the superstars. So that was my reasoning for getting into the bench. Sorry, skip one. Now for the 3-point line. So due to time constraints, instead of discussing individual players like I did when discussing the second book, I will talk about the person who was most important for this historical development, the man who created the 3-point shot. And I remember just being 2 weeks removed from defending my PhD thesis when the idea for the book appeared in my head. And basketball, like no other sport, gives one an opportunity to score 1.5 more points, dependent on the distance from where one takes his shot. In soccer, you always score 1 goal, right? No matter if you score from 11 meters or from the middle of the field. The same goes for football. A touchdown always counts for 6 points. A different sport, baseball, was actually crucial in making the three-point shot a regular fixture at professional basketball games. The commissioner of ABA, a short-lived basketball league that tried to compete with the NBA in the 60s and 70s, said the shot was inspired by the most exciting play in baseball, because of the home run, right? Because it also brought fans out of their seats. When the ABA ceased to exist in 1976, it seemed that the three-pointer died with it as well. However, the three-point shot was finally introduced in the NBA in the 1979-80 season. While the league was dealing with image issues and criticism regarding on-court violence, introducing the three-point line offered to change the game, add more space, and limit the players' interactions under the boards. The man responsible for the creation of the shot was Howard A. Hobson, the head basketball coach at Yale University. In 1949, Hobson published his outstanding book with the title Scientific Basketball, which would introduce a new way of thinking about basketball. While the sport already came a long way from the 1881 Springfield Gym, in which two nine-player teams tried to outscore one another by throwing a soccer ball into beach baskets, it was still far from organized in the fashion we are familiar with today. And it was actually Yale University, the college team Hobson would later coach, that played the first 5-on-5 basketball game against the University of Pennsylvania on March 20th, 1897. Hobson was one of the first coaches who understood the importance of scouting and began collecting field goal data. In scientific basketball, he notes that these are of great value to the coach. If an opponent is able to score only certain types of shots, this fact has valuable implications as to how to play against his opponent. More importantly, though, Hobson gathered the data from 460 college basketball games and used his observations to revolutionize basketball by dividing the court into 3 scoring zones, dependent on shot possibility. The first zone, under the basket, ended at 12 feet from the basket. The second ended at 24 feet, and the third stretched beyond that distance. They were devoted to, respectively, the short shot, the medium shot, and the long shot. When referring to the last one, Hobson noted that since the shooting average from this area did not compare favorably with the averages from other zones, it was becoming neglected, which was a shame because, as he said, no shot has more player and spectator appeal or is more helpful to the entire offensive plan in any style of play. According to Hobson, efficient long-distance shooters could lure big men away from the basket, making the game of basketball more eye-pleasing and free-flowing. He urged coaches to teach the two-hand shot because of the ways it could influence the game. In that time, most players depended on close, one-handed shots instead. A decade later, his ideas were put into action. However, the opinions on this development were, well, let's say they were divided. Journalists hated the idea of players pulling up and scoring jump shots, only to have the other team do the same. This supposedly turned games into high-scoring festivals by players who put individual records above team play. While these arguments sound preposterous from today's perspective, there was indeed a large opposition against the jump shot in the 50s. However, the wheels were already set in motion, and with the shot came the invention of gunners, so players whose shooting skills made them stand out on the court because of their shooting ability. Three-point shooters would appear much, much later, as the line was still a subject of discussion and experimentation, even by Hobson himself. Hobson also planned to make short shots, so those made within the radius of 12 feet from the basket, to be scored at 1 point each, but he settled on the three-point line and a widened foul lane during the historical first incarnation of the three-point line in a game between Columbia and Fordham on February 7, 1945. As noted in my book, both teams made the most of the opportunity to fire away from long distance, and the fans, as anticipated by Hobson, reacted with excitement. In a survey conducted after the game, they voted 60-40 in favor of the introduction of the three-point line and 70-30 for widening the lane. It took 30 years for the line to be incorporated by a professional league, but the NBA has fully embraced it only in the late 2000s. And with this development, new narratives were created, all of which just beg for a deeper exploration.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let me use the appropriate Zoom response. No, the wrong one.
Okay.
This is the appropriate Zoom response. That is the clapping hand.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we will be moving on to questions. I don't know if you want to switch off the presentation.
Yeah, I think I did it.
Fantastic.
Sorry for getting so stressed out. Sorry.
It's okay. It's totally fine. I think Zoom presentations are here kind of as a punishment for a choice of a career that is in academia. So worry not. I have a few questions, and because I'm the moderator for today, I'll ask mine first, but I just wanted to encourage our audience to just let me know in the chat that you would like to ask a question, and or either type the question in the chat, because I think that there were quite a lot of topics mentioned, and I can see in the chat here that there are some hardcore basketball fans out there in the audience.
Yeah, I see some really nice, yeah.
Yeah, so you know, this is your chance. But I think my question is probably very predictable. I am one of the people who kind of like grew up with Michael Jordan as part of her childhood, and then watched The Last Dance, right? Mm-hmm. And this is, I think, it is a major cultural phenomenon. This documentary is a major cultural phenomenon. I can see that people were commenting on it here, and one of the criticism hurled at this text of culture was its depiction of race. And the larger argument was obviously that because Michael Jordan was one of the producers, and like he had major influence on the shape of the documentary, but also that, you know, throughout his career, right, race was something kind of addressed but non-addressed, and like he was a very safe as an African-American kind of hero. And I wondered, you know, what do you think about this discussion, both about Michael Jordan as this iconic character, but also, you know, the discussions of Last Dance as a text right now. And one trivia that I love about Last Dance is that when the episode about Dennis Rodman appeared and there was Carmen Electra, like the Google search results for Carmen Electra skyrocketed since like forever, because like people discovered Carmen.
Yeah, people did not know, right? Younger people do not know how like hot, not in the sense of like physical appearance, but in the sense of popularity, how hot Carmen Electra was. I mean, she has a reality show with, what was the name of her husband? Okay, Dave Navarro. I think they had a reality show together as well, so they were really.
Yeah, it was Dave Navarro.
Yeah, it was really popular. Also, okay, so coming back to your question about Jordan, it's actually hard to assess because some people who like support Michael Jordan claim that because of the fact that he was able to become so popular, he allowed other African Americans to gain the same level of popularity. So I've heard opinions that, for example, we see today that LeBron James is outspoken politically. And because of the fact that Jordan paved the way and allowed other African-American players to reach maybe not the same level, because clearly nobody will reach the level that Jordan reached when it came to like mythical status. That it's also, he set the example, and that was enough for some people. To be honest, I don't know. There's this infamous or famous story about, a Jordan quote who said Republicans buy sneakers too. I think it's in the documentary as well, right? If I remember it correctly, yeah. So there's no need to retell it. So to be honest, I don't really know what to think. I'm not the biggest Jordan fan, to be honest. So maybe I'm not the right person to address it. Yeah.
Shocking. We actually have a comment from Michael Fuchs, who says David Leonard has written some great stuff on Michael Jordan and Ray. So thank you for that comment. I will definitely look it up. And we have a question from Hubert Gadowski, who asked, and I'm wondering, by the way, if this is about like the actual, do you mean narratives about them or the way they play in terms of what you're asking? But the question is, can we actually compare players from different eras when the game itself constantly changes? For example, Chamberlain, Russell, Jordan, or LeBron. Okay. Mm-hmm.
In terms of GOAT talks, okay. I mean, everybody has their opinion on this topic. There are some people who claim that like Jordan would score 50 points in today's era, or that Bill Russell, like he won 11 championships and he would win like 1 or 2, judging from the way the NBA is shaped today. So it is more of a barroom conversation, to be honest. And I don't want to say that I'm above these types of conversations because I also participate in them. But I think that because of, it's hard to judge players as outside of their eras, and this applies to narratives as well. When you think about like the career narrative of other players, it's like when you think about Bill Russell, it's hard to see Bill Russell without the racism that he like encountered in Boston, and it's hard to think about like LeBron James outside of him being the chosen one and him picking the number 23. It's obvious why he picked the number 23, because Jordan wore the same number. So it's, yeah. And you also have another question, or Jordan wouldn't win anything without Pippen. Obviously, how many championships has Jordan won without Pippen? That's my question. Has Jordan won anything without Pippen? Yeah. He hasn't, so that answers your question, right?
I think that, by the way, Pippen is the kind of silent hero of The Last Dance. Among the non-basketball fans that I've discussed this documentary with, and there is an entire kind of group of people who don't know much about basketball but still watch the documentary. Like, I think Pippen is like the hero. Like, forget about Jordan, forget about Dennis Rodman. Like, he is like that narrative is the one kind of, I think, that is most effective in the documentary. And I'm so sorry to constantly talk about the documentary.
No, but it's great. It's a valid point that you've made, actually, because like Pippen, I'm sorry, my dogs are going crazy. Pippen is representative of the time when general managers actually and teams controlled the player's destiny, right? Because Pippen was making like, sorry, dog got tangled into the headphones. Okay.
We understand.
Give me a minute, okay? Just a minute. Okay, so Pippen is the remnant of like the times when teams actually controlled players. Now there's a certain movement towards player empowerment where they can control their narrative. They can, for example, say, I want to play with this guy. Go get this guy. If you won't get this guy, I quit. Right? You know, then trade me. This was the case, for example, with Kawhi Leonard, who said that he is going to sign with the Clippers only if the Clippers get Paul George, like a different player. And because of that, that was his reasoning for signing. And Pippen, when he talks about the fact that he makes like $3 million, right? That's like the main point of the narrative. In today's NBA, that clearly wouldn't happen. He would leave the team after like a year or something.
Okay, we have like our chat is on fire.
Great, it's great.
I mean, we have to do more sport coverage in here. So I will read a few questions and then you can kind of take your pick on the order. But Mr. Małek was first, who asked, do you think, is there a possibility of the real next Jordan, not necessarily in the aspect of sports success, but rather business success phenomenon that would change the game and the NBA forever, in the similar way like Jordan and his brand connected with Nike did? And just maybe a few more questions. Eric asked, who is your favorite player in NBA history? Just curious. Alexander Levitsky, who do you think is the season's MVP and why is it
Nikola Jokic? Yeah, that's pretty much, that's very on point.
Okay, so maybe like, take those questions and then we'll move on to some other question. We have still one from Mr. Zubel, Ms. Paluch, and Mr. Gadowski, but coming back to this comparative kind of business acumen, right? So the next Jordan in terms of like game changers, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, my guess is as good as yours, to be honest, because I mean, it was improbable that even one Michael Jordan existed. You had an athlete who like transcended race, transcended everything. I mean, the fact that I think Saul Bellow was even writing about Jordan in one of his novels, and you had such a character that everybody knows who Michael Jordan is, even now. I mean, imagine how much time has passed. And I have mentioned in my presentation, and I also mentioned it in my book, that 11 years after retirement, Michael Jordan was still, I think, the second most popular American in China. I think Naomi Klein writes about it in No Logo, that the Pope was the first, I think, Western-like icon that everybody knew, and the second was Michael Jordan. So it's kind of crazy. And I think it's impossible to duplicate it. You have players like LeBron James who use the platform created by Jordan. In this sense, we can say that, as I said earlier about the commentators, right? That Jordan created the platform for other African-American athletes to speak up. And this is the case with LeBron James, that he uses his platform to speak up. And also Steph Curry became like a representative of, he was the closest I think we had to a transformative player, because he was small, relatively small by NBA. He's still relatively small by NBA standards. His main quality is like shooting from long distance, yet he does it with such finesse that no player will actually follow in his footsteps. Yeah. Mm-hmm. There was a question about my favorite NBA player in history, right? That's a tough question, but I think Alonzo Mourning was my favorite basketball player because he looked like a basketball player. And I had something when I wanted to be that guy, like he was so physically imposing.
I mean, it's an interesting thing, like I'm sure many seminar paper could be written about, what does it mean to look like a basketball player, but obviously I think it's a great answer. And then skipping over, and then you can kind of share a bit more in terms of Nikola Jokic and MVPs, but I see a few other questions. So Mikołaj Zubel asks, I'm no basketball enthusiast, but I read that there is a salary cap in the NBA. You said that Michael Jordan was the first to make himself a brand as a sportsman. Could it be due to the salary cap?
Sure. To be honest, I don't know if there can be any relation, because salary cap is like the number of, like the amount of money that you can pay to your players. Like the amount of money that you can pay to your players. So every team has the same salary cap. So it sort of introduces equality in the league, but also it creates certain problems. But because, for example, if you are going to make the same amount of money in Los Angeles and you're going to make the same amount of money in Oklahoma or Cleveland, it's probably better to make the same cash in LA, right? And because of the salary cap, actually Jordan, I think, was making 23 million when the salary was 34, when the salary cap was 34 million. So he was eating most of his team's salary. So I think it was maybe despite the salary cap, in fact, because I think that if the salary cap wasn't put in place, he would make much, much more. And he would have much better teammates. Oh, the dog is passing the paw. Such a smart doggy.
Yeah, I see that there is some dog owner jealousy going on here.
Yeah.
So let's move on to some more questions. Victoria Paluch asked, how do you feel about retired players becoming NBA reporters and evaluating the game of other players? Also, as you have mentioned, the importance of the I think 6 men. Who, in your opinion, should win the award this year?
Oh, okay. That's a tough question. Okay, so I'm going to answer the second part because it's easier. So I think that Jordan Clarkson or Joey Ingles, because I think that Utah Jazz need to see some love for the awesome season that they are having. Okay, so this and the first part, I think that it's actually fine because in sports you have the same thing, like you have in other sports, like in Polish soccer, we have the same thing where soccer players become reporters. Whether they are good at reporting or bad, it's clearly another case. Although when you think about the NBA, players, I think, can handle the criticism better when it comes from people who have participated in the sport. Like, for example, if I would be a basketball player and somebody who never played basketball, who is like, let's say 6'1" and small and unathletic would criticize me, I would probably have a problem with it. So I kind of understand why I also understand why athletes get into the sports, because people talk about a certain kind of kinship that forms when you are a member of the team. And I encountered this only in male narratives, but they say they often miss the guys, as they put it, like being one of the guys and being with the guys. So this also allows them to somewhat prolong this state of, it's not childhood, but it's, I think Michael Kimmel wrote that men are often stuck in what is called guy land, that they don't want to be men, they want to remain guys. So being a reporter and being close to the sports, which is basically something childish, right? I think we can agree that sports is childish in a sense, in the positive and in the negative aspects of it. It's very childish. And this allows them to keep their dream alive, more or less, in the sense that they are still with the guys and they can be close to the sport that they love. Yeah,
I'm sorry, can I say something like very quickly?
Yeah, please do.
I just very much don't like the argument that like players can get the criticism better if it comes from the NBA players. I mean,
no, they can handle it better.
Yeah, I mean, okay, but like at the same time, we have Shaq and Paul Pierce who are just talking like really not important stuff, and they have no clue what's going on right now in NBA. And the same time, we have like Rachel.
I said,
yeah, and at the same time, we have Rachel Nichols, who like has never played in NBA because she's a woman and all those stuff, and she has a great mind and like her analyses are on point and it is perfect. So like maybe the players can handle it better, but I think as the fans we should create a narration that it is not like actually necessary to be the NBA former player to have great analysis. I don't know. I just think so.
I mean, that's a good point, but we want things to be one way, and it doesn't mean that they will be that way, right? In an ideal world, obviously, that would be great, but no.
I kind of continuing in this mode of kind of narrating basketball. Sebastian Niedzielski asked, among the many NBA fans who grew up watching basketball in the Jordan era, so in the 90s, it is often believed that today's basketball lacks that finesse that characterized the 1990s era and is now too focused on a tactical, mechanical approach to the game. Is there something in this sense that the current generation of NBA stars is missing something that players of the 90s had? And I have to say that I agree with Mr. Niedzielski wholeheartedly. Like, the basketball fans around me, and it's probably the age at which we constantly say that, then things were good and now they're shit. But like, this is definitely a sentiment like, oh no, now that like the LeBron James type of basketball is like worse than the basketball of Jordan and all of that. So what do you think?
Yeah, to be honest, I have some problems with agreeing with that, although I understand where it's coming from, in the sense all teams right now, I've noticed a certain that try to play basically in the same way, meaning they rely too much on the 3-point shot. And not everybody is Steph Curry, not everybody is Kyle Korver and all these other great shooters. So this leads to, a lot of games actually end in blowouts, which is what I have, that one team wins by, let's say, 30 or 40 points. Because they have a good shooting night. So I have kind of a problem with that when I'm thinking about games that are like uncompetitive. When you think about like Sacramento Kings playing Oklahoma City Thunder, like it's a game that, I don't know, 5 people watch or 10 or whatever. So nobody cares about that. But it's the quality of the basketball when it comes like the bottom feeders is not so good. But at the same time, when you think about Steph Curry, it's hard to say that he lacks finesse. He's probably the most finesse player, one of the most finesse players like in the history of basketball ever. So it depends on the team. Actually, it's hard to judge.
I can see. So we have a beautiful shout out from Mr. Mandrzycki, who says that I just want to remind every basketball fan that WNBA season starts tomorrow and definitely worth checking out. And then a comment, and I really like the kind of where another question is going. This is from Mr. Tomasz, who says, I have to be this annoying guy who asked this question. What do you think about carbon dioxide emissions in NBA? Due to the fact that there are 82 games in the season, it is one of the most polluting sport in the whole world. Oh, I didn't know that. Do you think NBA will address it somehow? For instance, the bubble was good for the environment. Do you think it can be done in the future too? So
yeah, it's a very good point, and I totally agree with it, but it's hard to find a solution. I also have a problem actually, because moment of like being 100 here, like I'm vegan, right? And I have a problem with the ball being made out of skin and the shoes. Like, try to get basketball shoes that are vegan. It's impossible almost to get them. Or like sneakers, which are like vegan and look nice, because vegan shoes are usually awful. They look awful. They look really bad. I don't know what's the difference. So I actually agree with that. It's a solid point, although it's hard to say if the fans commuting to these games would probably like increase or maybe like equal the production of carbon dioxide when they would come to visit games.
Yeah, that is true. I have to say that I was a big fan of like kind of sideline watching games during COVID, where the audience was just played from the background. Maybe that's the future of sports, but probably everyone who enjoys a live performance of a game.
Yeah, it's way better.
would not agree. Okay, my last question, and then we'll have to finish, but I'm sure that there are ways of contacting Łukasz if you guys want to, guys and girls.
Let's talk about female basketball as well. Yes.
Yeah, this would be my question.
It's appreciated. Okay, that's great. Yeah,
that is true. So I would say that I appreciate that someone else mentioned women in basketball, because the label of the person who does gender that I have is, strong. So I appreciate that someone else said it. So just reading out one last question, and then, you will see how you want to pick it up. This is from Albert Ambrosiewicz, who says, how do you feel about some narratives influencing the game aspects, trophies, trades, draft selection, contract buyouts, to the point of people being almost forced to make irrational decisions, like Barkley or Rose winning MVPs, one of Ball brothers being selected too high, and then one being selected too low in the draft. So either this or women's basketball, it's up to you where you want to go. But
I mean, it's a nice... I appreciate the question made by Albert, but he is my friend, so I appreciate him making the question. But I think that I would prefer maybe to talk about female basketball, if that's possible. I hope that he won't be. I'm actually working with Albert on the book on James Harden, so we are working together. Okay, so just quickly. Well, I think that when we talk about female basketball, it's clearly underappreciated. And I also have spent some time with a Polish team from the first league. I was trying, actually, okay, I'm going to keep it 100 once again. I wrote a book on a Polish team from the first league. So not Ekstraklasa, not the highest league, but the one below. Why it's called like that. I actually have a hard time with publishing the book. I don't want to sound like I'm looking for a publisher right now. I just want to say that female basketball is so underappreciated that actually it's hard to publish even a book on female basketball, because they say that the audience is too small. And I also contacted academic publishers on writing a book on European female basketball players' narratives, and they said that the market for such a book was too small as well. So I think that we need to appreciate female basketball more, because of the fact that it's highly enjoyable. We even have a female basketball team here in Warsaw that has been promoted to Ekstraklasa, Polonia Warszawa. I highly recommend their games. I don't want to cause like any tensions between Legia and Polonia fans. This is not the case, because Legia doesn't have a female basketball team. So we can just ignore the tensions. I tried away, we can cut through them. And yeah, I think that female basketball needs more investment and needs more appreciation.
I wholeheartedly agree, and maybe I am biased because I kind of grew up with Polonia basketball female player, so I am biased. Victoria Paluch asks, what team from the first league did you spend time with? Is it
Polonia? It's Polonia, yeah.
Okay.
And actually, I had enormous luck, because that was the season that they were promoted to Ekstraklasa. They won, I think, 20 or 19 games in a row, something like that. So monsters. They just devoured everybody. Incredible.
Yeah. I agree, and if people take out one thing from, I'm sure they will take out a lot, but if you want one final thing to take out of it, is watch more women's sports in general, because more market means more money, and then more exhibition, so that we can talk about.
It's better product, right? The more the money, actually, the better the product, and the people actually care about what they are doing. I wasn't only with that team, but also I talked with other teams and from the Pierwsza Liga, okay, and they are really enormously devoted to the sport.
And I think, I am waiting for the moment where, a talk about commodification in sports will focus more on women, and not just Serena Williams, but just more women in general. But I'm glad that this is where we arrived after a presentation that, focused so intensely on really fantastic, phenomenal athletes, male athletes. Okay, thank you, everyone. I don't know how well you can see the chat, Łukasz, but there are some incredible UPs and yehays in the audience. I think this is call for us doing a bit more of a sports themed presentations here in our seminar and our talk series. So thank you very much for spending this time with us, and I hope this is just the beginning and that we will get to host you in the future, maybe actually live in a building, in a room. Thank you everyone who stayed. I know we've taken up a quite long time, but I just wanted to make sure that that everyone who asked a question would get an answer. And we will see you next semester with a whole new roster of talks. So thank you, Łukasz. Thank you to the audience, and we will see you next semester.